Patrick, welcome to Rock's blog.
Hello.
Hello. So we're here today to talk about your short, Ill Fares the Land. Just give us a little bit of an introduction to the film.
Yeah, sure. So, Ill Fares the Land is a fantasy drama. It's about a young boy who finds a mermaid washed up on the shores of his seaside home, while his older brother is swept up in the rising tide of far-right nationalism. So yeah, that's our log line. We shot it in Dungeness, in Kent, and yeah, we're doing the festival round at the moment with the film.
Brilliant. I love that. You've got your log line down. Well done.
You just become so you're like because you say it so much like even before making the film, when people are asking what are you doing, and you're like, oh, I'm making a film about this. So yeah, you just get it. Yeah, I'm just so used to now saying that log line.
So, I mean, you are broaching big topics and you've got a lot in there. So you've got folk horror. It's a very sort of social realist drama and it's politicized. How were you able, like, what was the inspiration and how were you able to weave those all together?
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly, actually. There are all these sort of different elements to the film. And for an 18-minute film, actually, when you kind of sit back and think about it, there's quite a lot going in there. So you can tell that I had like various sort of different things on my mind. On the first hand, I really wanted to do a film, really about a mermaid. Like I'd been sort of fascinated with that kind of type of mythology. I'd sort of grown up with that kind of mythology. So I was really, really sort of, intent on making a film that involved a mermaid somehow. But I suppose the sort of the big thing on my mind, kind of when the film first kind of formed in my head was obviously the rise of the far right. And I sort of wrote that film in 2022. It's now 2024, where that's even
It's
more kind
worse.
of present. Yeah. So like the big thing was really I was thinking about the rise of the far right, the kind of a kind of renaissance, I suppose, for fascism potentially in the West, sort of from Britain to America and Europe. Um, and then I kind of stumbled upon the idea of obviously using a mermaid as a kind of metaphor or stand-in for a refugee who sort of crosses the sea. And yeah, and once I kind of had that, once I realized that the mermaid was that kind of metaphor for a migrant, the film really kind of took shape.
Yeah. It's brilliant and it's one of those things that when you watch it, you're like, that's so obvious. But I mean, I love the way you've done it as well. The mermaid, she's not you'd associate like your little Ariel or your singing or whatever. There's a very sort of raw, animalistic nature to her. Why did you want to go down that way?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of it sort of, like came down actually to the actress, Smilla. So obviously, when you write a film, or at least when I write a film, I have a kind of rough idea of the characters, but I love going out and finding actors and the cast to kind of bring it to life and to sort of inject their own kind of perceptions and feelings and ideas into the character. So, when you're writing a script, you just write mermaids, but you don't really sort of think about like, okay, actually, how exactly are we going to do this? So for me, it was important that it felt realistic. We didn't want to do your kind of classic fairy tale Ariel. We wanted to do something that felt kind of realistic and gritty, that kind of fit into the world of the film, which was very, very dark. And Smilla, our actress, was just really, really sort of, even more than me, was really into thinking, okay, how does she breathe on land? Like she was thinking about the kind of physiology, the physics of the character, the biology. So a lot of that kind of performance came from her. She'd sort of come to me with ideas in rehearsal, and then we kind of flesh it out. And then I suppose on another level, with the kind of the mermaid sort of as a kind of migrant, and the film is told from the kind of perspective of the kind of white working class community, that they kind of the elements of that community see migrants as a threat. They see them as something kind of like, yeah, scary, as foreign. So the idea of actually having the mermaids be sort of somewhat animalistic, because the film is from their perspective, it kind of made sense to me that there's a kind of element of threat for the characters, because this is what they're projecting onto migrants, like. So yeah, that's kind of how that character really came about.
Yeah. And I mean, that's perfect. That's exactly how I read it watching the film, that she's threatening, that, she could be dangerous, that, and that comes across. So not only is it the fear, of, yeah, it worked brilliantly. So I'm glad you answered it that way.
And another thing in that performance as well, and I remember talking to Smiller about it, like we had the kind of, yeah, like sort of somewhat of the threat, but there was also a vulnerability as well.
Yeah.
We wanted this to be a kind of vulnerable creature. And there's that moment in the film where George and the mermaid kind of share that kind of that moment where she's sort of almost asking him for help. And I mean, ultimately, the whole kind of big sort of question of the film is that, are you going to help desperate people,
Yeah.
fleeing war and persecution, or are you going to turn against them?
Yeah.
So there's that element in the film and ultimately in the performance as well.
Yeah. And how did you make the mermaid? Her tail, her look. What about the effects on that?
Yeah, again, so we were really, really lucky. Like, sort of, when you say you're going to make a film with a mermaid, like for me at least, like one of the most important elements is you need to get a really damn good looking mermaid tail, because
Yeah.
I knew the film would fall apart if we kind of cut to the mermaid shot and it's just a rubbish sort of looking tail. It would just the audience just wouldn't take it seriously, especially given the subject matter. So I was really lucky. I found a guy called Siki, who basically for a living makes mermaid tails, makes swimmable mermaid tails. I
Oh,
found him on,
cool.
yeah, and I just said, "Your mermaid tails are amazing. Would you make one for my film?" And he said, "Yeah." And then like the whole process was really, really weird. Like I only kind of met him once, but in order, we couldn't afford to do like a full body mold, so instead we just like we got our actress and then we just wrapped her in gaffer tape, sort of all around her lower body. And that kind of created this sort of mold. I then put that in a suitcase. And then I met Siki in a park in London. He lived, I don't know where he lived. I met him in a park in London and just gave him this suitcase with this kind of gaffer tape body mold of Smiller's lower half. And then 2 months later, the suitcase shows back up again with a mermaid tail in it. So
Great.
I was really not involved in it. I just was like, I want it to be this color, and yeah, go to town, do what you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and you're right, and it does. It looks so real. Again, it's not like something you could imagine, a child to wear or something. There's an element you can really see it come from the sea, and if you're imagining some kind of this type of mermaid, it's got it all there.
Yeah, and it was really heavy as well. So like the thing that they like the tail was it weighed about 20 kilos.
Oh wow.
But all the underwater stuff,
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure, like because obviously we had Smilla in the tail swimming on underwater, and there was a part of me that was really worried that I was like, is she just gonna like get in the tank and then just sort of go and sort of drop to the bottom, and then we kind of be there with the camera like, oh no, what do we do now? Thankfully, that didn't happen. But yeah, but like there was a little bit of nervousness about like, man, this thing it weighs a ton, and carrying it around that beach that we shot on, yeah, it was a labor of love. That's to say that, yeah.
One thing that really struck me is obviously people associate generally seaside towns with fun and joy and bright lights and fish and chips, but everything's very grey. There's almost a haze over the whole film, which obviously, speaks to the themes. But yeah, how did you get that color, that look, that tone right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I grew up in a seaside town. I grew up in a place called Herne Bay in Kent. And it's got that, and like, and I love, I really love Herne Bay where I grew up, and I love the sea, and I love the kind of vibes of seaside town, fish and chips, arcades, just having the ocean there. But at the same time, obviously there's a kind of underbelly to these kinds of towns and communities. They've kind of been cast adrift, sort of economically speaking. So there's actually a lot of poverty, pockets of poverty sort of hidden in these places. And obviously, unfortunately, there's also this kind of this sort of rising fascist sentiment, essentially. And it's something that even when I was growing up was there. But, the last few years, as I've kind of gone back to these kinds of places, I've noticed it being even more prominent. So yeah, so there's a part of me, and it's similar. One of the last films I made was also set in a seaside town, which had a kind of similar aesthetic, which was sort of grey, depressing, dark, grim. So there's a part of me that's a little bit sad that every time I kind of put a seaside town on camera, it's this really grim place,
Yeah.
because it's not all that. But obviously, in the world of All Fair's the land it needed to be. And I think that the atmosphere that we get is because we shot it in Dungeness. So like one of the main things I said that I'm not going to make this film unless I get to shoot in Dungeness, because Dungeness, it's such a kind of otherworldly landscape. It's beautiful, but at the same time, it kind of it feels sort of, yeah, like dark and sort of desolate. So it was just again, it's just one of those occasions that when you go to the location, everything's already there. It's got all of the sort of the atmosphere. So I think that really, really strengthened the kind of the visual look of the film. And
Yeah.
obviously, Stephen, our cinematographer, is just super talented, and he can just make anything look just like $1 million, basically.
Yeah. No, you're right, because you need that. You need, yeah. I mean, it's the grit and it's like you said, it's that seedy underbelly, and it's what people, it's the things that people don't see, and it's the things that people ignore as well. And, it's quite easy to go to these places and go, no, I'm not paying any attention to that, and everything's fine and dandy, and it's only really it's that veneer that we put on things, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that was the major like sort of like political statement of the film is that like we can't ignore this. Like we can't ignore these communities that many of them are incredibly poor. They're not having a good life.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, as a result of that, they are becoming racist and xenophobic and authoritarian. And that if we continue to ignore this, this will be a problem that might indeed sort of take us all over.
Yeah.
So that was a big political statement of the film, which yeah, it was sort of saying we need to sort of start talking about these kind of communities because they
Yeah.
are becoming fascist, and there are reasons why. People don't just wake up and suddenly become fascists.
No. No, and I think it's fascinating as well that you're doing it from the side of the children. So
Yeah.
while the dad is a tyrant and he's violent, and obviously we don't sort of hear his political views, but you're talking about a younger generation, and that for me was the most terrifying thing. And obviously the older brother is then indoctrinating his younger brother, and you can see how easily those things happen. But it's looking at their kids essentially.
Yeah, and I get it feeds into that point that like people don't suddenly like people aren't like born evil or don't suddenly like, wake up and sort of become bad people. So with the character of George, a young boy, like it's because he's surrounded by this environment, this bleak, grim environment that's poor, that he's got a bitter father, that he's got a brother that's become radicalized, and all of this stuff is feeding into him, and potentially will kind of turn him into one of them, but he doesn't start out that way. It's a process in which he's made into that.
Yeah. Did you have to do any particular research sort of into people who are, being drawn to these groups, and to try and get the authenticity in there?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, I'm a very political person, and obviously the kind of the rise of the far right had been kind of on my mind for a few years before I even kind of wrote the film. But yeah, I mean, I did do research, and actually the whole kind of the speech sequence in the kind of abandoned house. The end of that scene is actually like a direct lift from a similar video I found on the internet of American fascists, literally word for word. So I wanted that to feel authentic, and also going into the kind of the tattoos, and the sort of how numbers have sort of significance for far right groups. So yeah, I wanted to kind of put all of that into the film to make it feel real, essentially. So yes, unfortunately, I did have to do a little bit of research for it. But then simultaneously, as you know, it's so omnipresent now as well.
Yeah.
You don't actually need to do that much research. Like you go down the street and you'll kind of start seeing it.
Oh, 100%. It's like you said, you found, a video like that on the internet. They're terrifyingly prolific now. And I think you
Yeah,
can just you don't even have to do a deep dive or anything to come across that kind of material.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
and yeah, and that's really, really sad.
It is. It's really, really sad and it's really scary.
Yeah.
But that's why sort of, we need things to talk about this, and film is a medium, of communication, of education, of just awareness
I
and
hope
everything.
so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the only way that that you will be able to kind of stop that kind of rise of the far right is that people like have to address it, and that we can't be ignorant to it. I know it's easier to ignore it. It's easier to pretend that no, actually, I think our country's this, and that I have these values. But the reality is that you've got a growing group of people that don't feel that way.
Yeah.
You're going to need to address that, or yeah, things could get really bad.
Mm. Well, moving away from politics, I mean, as much as we can,
Yeah,
I loved your editing. And there's a
thank you.
particular scene which really stood out for me. So it's where we've got the mermaid sort of drowning. There's your soundtrack, which really comes in. And then we've got flashes of the brothers. And I was rewatching it again this morning. It gave me goosebumps, just all those little bits together. Was post-production, was that, a hefty part of everything?
Yeah, I mean, post-production is always like a massive part, or at least it should be. I was super lucky. The editor, Michael Pentley, he's brilliant. And then you mentioned the music, which was done by Magdalena, and she's just got such a great voice. And I brought on a composer actually before we even started production on the film. Magdalena came on really, really
Amazing.
early because I heard her voice and it had a
Yeah.
kind of siren like quality and was like, this is going to be brilliant. Um, it, it, Interestingly, that kind of ending montage, the film was written for that, So I always kind of envisioned that was how we were kind of leading up to our kind of cacophony, which was all of the kind of separate elements, the drowning, the brothers, and yeah, all of that would kind of come together. So, but it's even better, when you see it.
Yeah.
And it's better than I could have hoped for. And yeah, a large part of that I think is the music. The music is just phenomenal. So I'm so thankful that Magdalena gave me such a great score.
Yeah. How was the process for you bringing on a composer at the very beginning? Is that the first time you've done that in the making of a film?
It is actually, yeah. So yeah, I mean it was so Magdalena read the script because originally I actually asked her to produce it and she said I don't want to produce it, but I want to be the composer. And she liked the script so much, she also came on board as our art director as well. So Magdalene was there every day that we were filming. She was obviously responsible for sort of dressing all of the sets and I worked with her a lot on color. And so we had all of these kind of discussions separate to music, just about the kind of the look and the atmosphere of the film based on the kind of the production design and the art direction. Um, and and I think as a result of that, she just became really in tune to what the film was about. So that when it came time to write the music, it just happened so quickly. It was just almost like, usually it takes a while, but it was just like
Yeah.
within a month, it was all scored, all written. Um, and and yeah, and there were very sort of few notes from me. It was brilliant. My only sort of big thing is that originally the film ended where George drowned in the bath, that he wasn't rescued by his brother. And I was like, this is too depressing, and we've got to have a kind of moment of hope. We've got to sort of say that no, like we can win, and I wanted to redeem somewhat the older brother a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and Magdalena was really kind of opposed to that to begin with. But then we both love Lord of the Rings, and I said that basically the moment it's the Fellowship of the Ring. It's when Frodo puts his hand into the water and drags out Sam at the end of the film. That's our moment, and that's our kind of music cue. And once I kind of sold her on that, she was a lot more sort of excited. And it's my favorite moment in the film is that music cue and then the hand coming into the water and bringing up the younger brother.
Yeah. I mean, I'm one for a dark ending. I really am. And some films, yeah, I think some films are ruined for me by the fact that they bring it up. But I think because you are dealing with such a huge topic, that I'm even imagining it with him dying, and I think that would have been a lot.
Yeah, it would have been too much. And also, like, I actually think it would have been inauthentic. Like, so for me personally, I don't actually think that because if he died, it would suggest that it's inevitable, like obviously, like the far right are going to win. But I don't actually believe that. So for
Right.
me, what I actually believe is that it can be beat, and the power of love and brotherhood, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I actually it really works for me because actually it's more in line with what I believe. The dark ending, it was just too cynical, I think.
Yeah. And so you're on your festival journey now. What reactions, what discussions have come out of this?
Yeah, I've been really really lucky with the festival run. We've gone to some great festivals, and I think people have reacted to the film, yeah, in the way that I wanted. Obviously when you make such a political film, you are a little bit nervous, or you're nervous that maybe somehow the messaging of the film it won't be clear to the audience, particularly when you're dealing with a film about racism. But people, I think, have really understood it, have really got it. And we've been having sort of like conversations like we're having now, similar conversations about, yeah, about the far right and what we can do, and also other elements, sort of other discussions that kind of that I didn't realize was sort of in the film until afterwards. But there's a whole kind of sort of so there's an idea of kind of toxic masculinity in that film, and that's been quite interesting to sort of almost sort of explore after you've made it and sort of
Yeah,
realize actually that is in the film, but I didn't necessarily consciously put it in there, but that is an element. So yeah, it's just I've just been really really lucky, and I'm really really grateful for all the festivals that have screened the film.
yeah. Well, we're looking forward to it at Brighton Rocks.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to going.
Brilliant. It'll be your pre-wedding festival.
It will literally the day after I fly out to Italy to get married.
Great.
Yeah. So it'd be one and I did my stag do in Brighton as well. So I did my stag do in Brighton a month ago. So
Okay.
it'll be nice to go back there one last time before I get married.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you.